Good news. For being the first of a genre, the game's a much smoother experience than you'd expect. In the first Dragon Quest, you play as a knight. You are special for one reason. You are the descendant of the great hero Erdrick, otherwise known as Lodo, or Rodo, depending on the region. Thus are you chosen to go combat the great menace Dragon Lord, who threatens to conquer the world with his horde of murderous monsters. And that's the whole plot. There's a warlord who's a meanie, so go beat him up. To accomplish your task, you will interact with the game in limited capacity. Expect to walk around slowly a lot, never diagonally, fight one-on-one, turn-based battles often, and talk to people every now and then. The game's primary challenge comes from its combat, which has no depth. Not only are there few options available to the player, the balance is woeful. All of the game's battles are turn-based. Every round, you select an option from a set of menus and watch the results play out as you and your opponent act. You can attack normally, select a magic spell, use an item, or run. It's the JRPG combat formula this game standardized. You will unlock 10 magic spells over the course of the game. 2 of these spells, Sizz and Sizzle, deal damage, but because the game has no intelligence stat, the spell damage is nearly fixed, although it is random within a fixed range. As Dragon Quest uses an MP system for limiting magic usage, offensive magic costs the same resource as healing magic. The result of this in the player character's good physical damage output is that offensive magic is practically worthless. There are also 2 status-inflicting spells, Snooze, which puts characters to sleep, and Fizzle, which prevents magic usage. Don't bother trying to use either one. Neither spell is reliably effective. Also, sleeping enemies wake up after being attacked once. In short, the strategy for all but one of the fights in the game is to physically attack all of the time unless you need to heal. Don't worry about having to manage a party of characters with distinct characteristics either, because every battle in the game is your solitary character against a lone enemy. Equipment is one regard in which Dragon Quest I almost succeeds. You can equip a weapon, one type of armor, a shield, and accessories. You will rarely find equipment through exploration, with some exceptions. Rather, you will need to grind for money to buy equipment. Differences between equipment are usually significant. Accessories are the exception. There are 4 accessories in the game. 2 are cursed and should not be equipped, although there is a man in the first town you can talk to if you do and need to remove that garbage. Another accessory can be bought in most item shops and increases defense by 2, which is cute, and by cute, I mean worthless. The last accessory, the Warrior's Ring, does literally nothing in the NES version because of a bug. In other versions, it might increase attack by 2, but even if it does, it's inconsequential. Then again, it might not do anything. My research indicated that no one really knows what the blasted thing does in other versions than the useless one on the NES. Accessories aside, not once in my playthrough did I replace a piece of my equipment with another without then leaving town, going into combat, and seeing and feeling the difference. I like that the game let you see how your stats would change from changing equipment in the shop before buying the item. Unfortunately, there's no decision making when it comes to what to equip. There is a clear hierarchy for every equipment type in the game, and you'll always immediately know what is best in any situation. Pieces either raise attack or defense, aside from the last 2 arm pieces which do a bit more but still don't introduce any decision making. The only decision you'll make in regard to a piece of equipment is whether it's worth grinding for. Grinding in general is pretty satisfying. Goals are usually clearly defined, in that you know how much money you need to buy your next piece of equipment, and once you earn a certain item you always know how much more experience you need to reach your next level. And rewards for grinding typically excite, although rewards for getting a level range from massive to better luck next time. What really makes the process work is that you're grinding in 2 separate ways at the same time. The goal of a grinding session is usually to make enough money to buy new equipment, from which you'll see your stats improve notably, but at the same time, the incremental improvements from gains in level come just frequently enough to keep you hooked. Better yet, while the combat has no depth, it's snappy. Transitions to and from combat take next to no time because the combat scene is very small, and it looks as though the game never unloads the exploration scene. Once you get into combat, the menus are very intuitive and animations are minimalistic. There's nothing in combat that you'll look forward to seeing, but there's nothing that'll exhaust your patience either, and that's just enough for me. While you will be grinding often for money to buy equipment, you won't often be spending money on items. Most items in the game are worthless. For one thing, the player's carrying capacity is low, so you'd rather leave as many spaces open as possible. The inventory size is 10 slots long, including equipment, although some items will let you carry duplicates without consuming another slot. Note that all versions of the game after the NES version include a bank and 2 towns for storage of items and money. Storage of money may be necessary because when your character runs out of HP, you respawn at the castle with half of the money you were carrying on your person gone. Even if inventory were unlimited, these items would still be pathetic. The medicinal herb heals as much as the first heal spell, although you can carry more than one in a single inventory slot. The Holy Water serves the same function as a late game spell, and each one takes up a whole slot in the inventory. You won't have access to Holy Water until the mid-game anyway, and it will be worthless in the early game because it's only useful for preventing encounters with enemies you outlevel. Torches light up some of the area when in caves, but they are categorically worse than a mid-level spell, Glow, that lights up more area. Frankly, you could reasonably grind your way to unlocking Glow before using a torch at all. By the way, none of these spells are MP expensive. The only item that serves the same function as a spell that might be considered MP expensive is the Chimera Wing, which is equivalent to the Zoom spell, but unlike the aforementioned spells, you won't need to use Zoom more than once per trip outside of town because after each time you use it when not in a dungeon, you'll be immediately returned to the castle, in which you will find an old man who will refill all of your MP for free. The only really useful items are the magic keys, which you will need to beat the game. You can't hold more than 6 at a time though, so don't leave town with fewer than that if you can avoid it. On the bright side, Dragon Quest has more virtues than merely its combat speed. The world design is above par. The game doesn't railroad the player. From the start, you can go wherever you want. The game's open structure goes a long way in making the adventure feel like it's yours, rather than like it's a game designer's guided tour of this world and you're just along for the ride. You won't just go anywhere, because different areas of the overworld feature different monsters of different levels of power, but it's nice to play a Japanese role-playing game that lets the player make his own decisions to this extent. I don't want to overstate the game's freedom, however, because while the game allows sequence breaking, you're not going to know how to do it on your first playthrough, and the game has insufficient content to warrant additional playthroughs where you can put your knowledge to use. Basically, the only decisions you'll make involve how much to grind before you'll head to the next area, or maybe try to complete one of the game's few real objectives. How do you find out about these objectives? You need to talk to every NPC in the game. I'm serious, do not skip talking to any NPC in this game, especially the ones behind the locked doors, because you just might skip the NPC who tells you the information you need to get a crucial item you need to beat the game. Fortunately, dialogue in this game is breezy and pleasant to read, and you won't find many NPCs anyway, so you won't find the gluts of verbiage that seem to plague so many JRPGs these days. I should mention that I played the game in Japanese, and it seems official translations of the game into English use a mock Old English style, so have fun with that. Meanwhile, all of the Japanese spell names are gibberish, instead of being descriptive of the spell's effects as they are in English. That being said, I wouldn't blame you for looking up reference material if you get stuck. Notable instances of cryptic means of advancement include getting the fairy flute. I found the guy who said where to get it but forgot about what he said before acting on his advice. The Erdrick's armor, the guy who says where to get it is hidden behind a locked door and his advice is very vague. And the Mark of Erdrick. I didn't find the NPC who would have said where to get it. Worst in this regard was the Sunstone. Multiple characters say something to the effect of, sun and rain and you can progress the plot. I found the rain-related plot device on my own, although not everyone will do that because it's a little weird to figure out, but I had no way of knowing what they were talking about with that sun object. Turns out, there's one NPC in the castle who says he's looking for a secret staircase. The staircase in question is nowhere near where he's looking for it. The other hint for what you're supposed to do is, when you leave the castle area through the east side of the area, it takes more steps to leave the area than it should. You can actually go down the east side of the castle until you reach a body of water. If you move 2 steps, 1 tile to the east, you can go further south until you reach a staircase. Down this staircase is the area in which you obtain the sunstone item from a treasure chest an old man is guarding. Basically, all of this has nothing to do with the sun, it's just the object's name, and not having found this area before, I had little way of knowing I was meant to come back here to get the item when I was at the point in the game it became necessary. The game doesn't have puzzles, by the way. It's just a matter of knowing what to do, and sometimes the game won't let you know. But don't think that's the only reason you'll want to have the wiki open. This game does not feature text descriptions for items or spells. This game was originally made for the Famicom, the Japanese equivalent of the Nintendo Entertainment System, so I understand that system had serious memory constraints, but I played the Super Famicom version. Releasing an RPG for the Super Famicom without text descriptions is inexcusable. Was such an obvious quality of life improvement really too much to ask for? There are quite a few differences between Dragon Quest's numerous versions besides the obvious technical limitations in visuals and audio, but I'll just give you the highlights. The original Japanese Famicom release used a password system. Saving was added for the North American NES release. The Super Famicom release turned the game's bosses into actual bosses, with significantly increased HP values. The first dragon was even given an overworld sprite. The menu options were reduced in the SFC version. In the NES version, when you want to go up or down stairs, you have to walk onto the stairs, bring up the menu, and choose the Stairs option. The NES version expects you to pick up items by choosing Take from the menu. Want to talk to an NPC? Choose Talk from the menu. Want to open a door? You need to have a magic key in your inventory and choose Door from the menu. Want to inspect the ground? Choose Search from the menu. The SFC version removes the stairs and take options from the menu entirely. The other options remain, but you can talk to NPCs, open doors, and inspect the ground with a press of the R button. Here's a funny fact: in the Famicom version, after selecting the talk option, you must choose the direction in which the adjacent NPC is to whom you wish to speak. This is because in that version of the game, character sprites only face southward. The ability to face the direction in which you were moving was added to the NES release. And the number one reason why you should prefer the SFC version is, the game was made dramatically less grindy. It takes less time to level up and earn gold. The Super Famicom release never came to America in any official capacity, but there is a fan-made English language patch available on the internet. Graphics in the game are just fine. If you like the pixelated look of old 80s and early 90s video games, you shouldn't dislike this game, although it's not very impressive, even on Super Famicom. It's certainly not an ugly game, but it looks like what it is: a 16-bit coat of paint over an 8-bit game. If you like Dragon Quest for its charming coterie of enemies, the first Dragon Quest isn't the best showcase of the franchise's monsters. Yeah, there are slimes, golems, drakes, chimeras, and skeletons, and you can see a good base for future games' expansive monster rosters, but the variety is low, and it seems like every enemy except for the final boss has a palette swap, or multiple palette swaps. Speaking of the final boss, he had a couple of notable traits. Firstly, when you talk to him, he doesn't immediately fight you, or even taunt you. Instead, he makes you an offer: join him, and receive half of the world in return. In all versions, it's a trick. The second interesting thing about him is, when you beat him the first time, he has a second form for you to beat. That was probably novel back in the day. As for the game's music, it's just fine. There's not a lot of it, but it's good enough and contributes to the game's adventurous feeling. That being said, I don't understand why the battle theme is so acerbic for such a laid-back game. The song is fine, but its frequent use can wear on your nerves after a while. A real note is the series' main theme, Overture, which is a fantastic, historic song. This game does not have the best version of it. Ultimately, this game is not worth playing today for anyone who isn't already a fan of Dragon Quest, never mind as an introduction to JRPGs. You should only play this game out of interest for its importance to the medium and the genre. That being said, it's rarely frustrating or buggy, and it's snappy and charming generally. Final rating? Could be worse. Enjoy grinding! In the mid-1980s, Japanese game designer Yuji Horii played installments in the Wizardry and Ultima series of computer role-playing games and was impressed by the depth of gameplay they offered past their simplistic graphics. They gave him the idea to make an RPG for the Family Computer, or Famicom, Japan's Nintendo Entertainment System, which he noticed lacked such games. He had already headed development on the adventure game Portopia Serial Murder Case, and was familiar with menu-based systems after working to port Portopia to the Famicom. Horii worked with Chunsoft, the company founded by the programmer partially responsible for Portopia's Famicom port, to develop Dragon Quest. When their game, featuring art designed by Akira Toriyama and music by Koichi Sugiyama, was released in Japan in 1986, it was a smash hit. It was such a huge success that it would spawn an entire genre. While RPGs and games incorporating elements from them had been made by Japanese companies and foreign RPGs had been released in Japan before, Dragon Quest created the template comprising the foundation for future games in the Japanese role-playing game, or JRPG, genre. That's not how the story went outside of Japan. Dragon Quest was published in Japan by Enix, which had no presence in America. When Dragon Quest came to America, it came in 1989 under the name Dragon Warrior, due to a pre-existing copyright, and was published by Nintendo of America. The game's failure was monumental. Historic, really. See, Nintendo thought the game was going to be a huge hit, and so produced a great number of units. When the game failed to do nearly the numbers necessary to eliminate the inventory, they were stuck bundling the game with subscriptions to Nintendo Power Magazine. Allegedly, the reason Nintendo thought that Dragon Warrior would sell so well, aside from its success in Japan a whole 3 years prior, was its resemblance to the first Legend of Zelda game, which had been very successful. It's really too bad Dragon Warrior had to come out like this, because for years after this game's release, Japanese companies would make great JRPGs and then just decline to release them in America, because JRPGs don't sell in America. Never mind the sales or acclaim of any other game on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System for the companies that took the plunge and brought JRPGs, between Dragon Warrior 1 and Final Fantasy VII, there was always trepidation about whether a JRPG could make its way into English in any official capacity. It's not so much of a problem today, with all of the re-releases and remakes and fan translations, etc., but had early JRPGs seen more worldwide success, the genre could have been a bigger deal, and more great Japanese role-playing games could have been produced. But I guess it's no use crying over spilt milk. At least it can be said there was a time when the JRPG had preeminence. Before Dragon Quest even hit store shelves, the men behind it were already thinking about Dragon Quest II. They were thinking about what depth they could add back from Western role-playing games without compromising the ease of use of Dragon Quest I. Meanwhile in America, nobody cared. Could Chunsoft repeat? Would Americans ever notice? Guess we'll find out next time when we look at Dragon Quest II.